ended today. So any final statement to Indonesia in the presidency, the G20, or any recommendations for us?
Congratulations to Indonesia, and terima kasih to the President for bringing us together. You have achieved what was thought to be impossible, to have leaders to agree on a joint statement to the world and to use their time to focus on the most difficult problems: slowing growth, high inflation, the food and energy insecurity in many places, high level of debt. So we have done a lot to bring consensus on these issues thanks to the summit in Bali.
All right, so what about the Russia invasion to Ukraine and the fact that Russia and the G7 countries are often at odds? How do you handle the conflict among the IMF members?
The message President Widodo passed to the world was very clear: end the war. It may be a war in Ukraine, far away from Indonesia, but it has affected the economy of all nations. And this is a message that I hope will be carried forward in the days and weeks ahead. For us at the IMF, we have 190 members, and we have worked hard to keep them together because the challenges they face are extraordinary. We have lived in short 3 years through shock upon shock upon shock. We had COVID. COVID took away a lot of wealth from the world, the equivalent of over 5% of our global GDP. We then had the war in Ukraine. It has pushed prices, especially energy and food, up, causing inflation. And then to respond to inflation, central banks are tightening financial conditions. In other words, rates are going up. That is causing cost of living crisis. And as you know very well, in Indonesia, climate change is already hitting us. We have had a number of climate disasters on all continents. So in that context, what we have seen is extraordinary. We were recovering from COVID. Global growth went up to 6.1% in 2021, and then abruptly went down 3.2% this year, down further 2.7% in 2023. This gloomy horizon has some bright spots. Indonesia is one of them.
All right, now let's talk about the recession that will be predicted come in 2023. Do you think that Indonesia has a big and strong enough capital to deal with it?
I am confident that Indonesia would come through the year ahead in a much stronger position than most of the world. We are projecting for this year, 22, 5.3% in Indonesia, and for next year, slightly slower growth at 5%, still almost 2 times higher than we have for the rest of the world. What is the strength of Indonesia? Reforms. You have made the economy much more competitive, open for investors. Your fiscal position is very good, and you also benefited from terms of trade because you are exporter of commodities where prices went up. But on top of these good actions, you have vibrant young population, and that is a huge benefit for Indonesia. Of course, despite all this strength of Indonesia, the economy is going to be affected by the slowdown elsewhere. US is slowing down, China is slowing down, the European Union is slowing down. This simultaneous slowdown of large economies that are importers of Indonesian products, of course, is going to affect you much less than many other countries.
All right, so the China economy is expected to slow remarkably, seems very challenging in the near term. So how it would impact in Asia, especially for the emerging economic countries like Indonesia, as we know that Indonesia and China has a relation that China is a big export market for Indonesia.
Of course, a slowdown in China is not only bad for the Chinese people, it is bad for Asia, it is bad for the world. We used to rely for about 40% of global growth on Chinese growth, no more. This year we are likely to see China finishing the year with around 3.2, 3.4% growth. Next year, 4.4% growth. This is far from what Chinese growth used to be. The countries have to adjust to a Chinese economy that inevitably would be on a slower growth path, not only because of the current difficulties due to COVID restrictions, to the real estate sector in China being in trouble, but also because China is aging. It doesn't have the capacity to grow that it had, say, a decade ago. What does it mean for Indonesia? Well, first, build more bridges with the other ASEAN countries. There is space for ASEAN to grow together. Second, there is a lot that Indonesia can do to generate more domestic production and consumption. There is plenty you can do, for example, for the green economy. Making renewable energy available everywhere in this large country is a huge job creation opportunity. And three, Indonesia can seek to be more of an exporter than an importer, and in fact this is already happening. China-Indonesia used to be, China imports a lot from Indonesia, exports not that much. Now there is more balance in that regard.
All right, do you expect it to rebound afterwards? So how do you see the China's medium-term growth?
I'm sorry?
Do you expect it to rebound afterwards about the China's economy? So, and how do you see the China's medium-term growth now?
Yeah, well, the way we see China is it will continue to be a very significant factor in the world economy, of course, because it is large and more diversified today. What we are hoping China would do is to pursue reforms that so far has served the country really well. And I would point to three areas where China can do more. One, to make state-owned enterprises and private enterprises operate on the same ground. Eliminate some of the privileges that state-owned enterprises enjoy. That increases competition, makes the economy more vibrant. Two, China is still in a position to pursue more openness. There are still parts of the Chinese economy that are somewhat protected. China can do more in that regard. And of course, three, China can be faster to adjust its policies to changing circumstances. We have seen in the case of COVID that China retained zero COVID policy for a long time. Now they have started to recalibrate it. That could have been done a bit earlier.
All right, the inflation rates, food prices, energy prices, there are still big challenges for Indonesia in 2023. So what are the economic policy actions that Asia, especially for the emerging economy like Indonesia, need to take to address the crisis?
The oil and gas crisis is due to the war in Ukraine primarily. And therefore, every effort should be made to end the war. But beyond that, it is important for countries to allow the market to function and send a signal to consumers and producers to be more energy efficient. If we compress the price, if we try to keep it low, all we do is we encourage more consumption, and more consumption means more pressure on prices upward. And the other very important measure for governments is to identify who are the most vulnerable in their society and direct support to them, not to everybody. Rich people should not be getting energy subsidies they can pay for their consumption.
All right. Thank you so much, Madam Kristalina Georgieva, for your time in this interview with KompasTV. Hope you always stay healthy and success for all of us, and enjoy Bali as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.